I have a gift for everyone tonight. But this gift is not wrapped in paper. It is wrapped in truth. My grandfather stood at the head of the dining room table, 91 years old and frail as a winter branch. But his eyes were sharp and clear in a way I had not seen in months. The grandfather clock in the hallway had just finished striking midnight, its 12 chimes fading into the silence of Christmas Eve, and every member of our family sat frozen in their seats, watching him. "Grandpa, maybe you should sit down," my mother said, starting to rise from her chair. "It is late, and you have had a long day. Sit down, Patricia." His voice cracked like a whip, and my mother dropped back into her seat as if she had been pushed. "I have waited a long time for this moment. I will not be interrupted." He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out a manila envelope, worn at the edges from handling. I recognized it immediately. I had seen that envelope in his study for years, always in the same drawer of his desk, always locked away from prying eyes. I had asked him about it once when I was young and curious, and he had simply smiled and said, "That is for later, Callum, when the time is right." The time apparently was now. "This is my last will and testament," Grandpa said, holding up the envelope. "I have updated it recently with the help of my grandson Callum, who, as you all know, is an estate lawyer. Everything is legal, everything is witnessed, everything is exactly as I want it to be." I felt the eyes of my family turn toward me, some curious, some suspicious, some openly hostile. My brother Derek was glaring at me from across the table, his jaw tight with barely suppressed anger. My mother's face had gone pale. My Aunt Margaret, Grandpa's daughter-in-law, was gripping her wine glass so hard I thought it might shatter. "I did not write the will," I said, holding up my hands. "I just verified that it was properly executed. I do not know what is in it." That was true. Grandpa had been very clear that he wanted the contents kept secret until tonight. He had shown me the document only long enough for me to confirm that it met all legal requirements, and then he had sealed it away again. "Callum speaks the truth," Grandpa said. "He has been the only honest person in this family for as long as I can remember. That is why I asked for his help. And that is why what I am about to do is going to come as a surprise to everyone, including him." He broke the seal on the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers. The top page was the will itself, but beneath it I could see photographs, bank statements, and what looked like handwritten letters. "I am not going to read you the legal language," Grandpa said. "That would take all night, and most of it is boring anyway. Instead, I am going to tell you what I have left to each of you. And I am going to tell you why." He looked around the table, making eye contact with each person in turn. When his gaze met mine, I saw something there that made my chest tighten. Sadness, and love, and a fierce determination that belied his age. "Let us begin," he said. "With my son Richard." My Uncle Richard, Grandpa's oldest child, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and loud, the kind of person who filled every room he entered. But right now he looked small, almost frightened. "To my son Richard," Grandpa read from the document, "I leave the truth about what happened to the $80,000 that disappeared from my savings account in 2019. The room went completely silent. I remembered that incident. Grandpa had discovered the missing money during a routine review of his accounts, and he had been devastated. He had trusted his children to help manage his finances, and someone had betrayed that trust. The family had spent months pointing fingers, and eventually the matter had been dropped without resolution. "I know who took it," Grandpa continued. "I have always known. I have bank records showing the transfer, security footage from the bank showing who made the withdrawal, and a very interesting email chain between Richard and a gambling website that was threatening legal action for unpaid debts." Uncle Richard's face had gone from red to white to a sickly gray. His wife, my Aunt Sandra, was staring at him with an expression of dawning horror. "Richard, you stole from me to pay your gambling debts. You let your siblings and your mother, God rest her soul, believe that someone else might have taken that money. You let suspicion fall on people who were innocent. And you never, not once, showed an ounce of remorse." "Dad, I can explain," Uncle Richard started. "I am not finished." Grandpa's voice was cold as steel. I am not leaving you any money, Richard. Not a cent. What I am leaving you is the truth, which I will be sharing with everyone in this room and, if necessary, with the authorities. You have until January 1st to repay what you stole with interest. If you do not, I have instructed Callum to file a police report on my behalf. Uncle Richard looked at me, his eyes pleading, but I just shook my head. I had not known about any of this, but if Grandpa wanted me to file a report, I would file a report. Moving on, Grandpa said, flipping to the next page. To my daughter Patricia. My mother straightened in her chair, her face a mask of careful composure, but I could see her hands trembling in her lap. To my daughter Patricia, I leave the confession that she forced me to sign when I was recovering from surgery in 2021. The one that gave her power of attorney over my finances and medical decisions without my informed consent. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I remembered that surgery. Grandpa had been in the hospital for a week, heavily sedated from a hip replacement that had gone badly. Mom had been managing things while he recovered, and I had thought nothing of it at the time. Patricia came to my hospital room when I was barely conscious from the painkillers, Grandpa said, his voice trembling with anger. She put papers in front of me and told me to sign. She said it was just routine that I needed to authorize some medical procedures. I trusted her. I signed. He held up a document, and even from across the table I could see my mother's signature and my grandfather's shaky scrawl. It was a power of attorney document, comprehensive, irrevocable, giving her complete control over my life. She used it to move money from my accounts into investments that benefited her. She used it to make decisions about my care that I never would have approved. And she did it all while I was too drugged to understand what was happening. Daddy, I was trying to help you, my mother said, tears streaming down her face. You were not capable of making decisions. Someone had to step in. I was recovering from surgery, Patricia. I was not incompetent. And the moment I realized what you had done, I had Callum help me revoke that power of attorney. But the damage was already done. You had already moved over $200,000 into accounts I could not access. The room was spinning. I had helped Grandpa revoke the power of attorney last year, but he had told me it was just a routine update that he wanted to simplify his estate. He had not told me the real reason. I am not leaving you any money either, Patricia. What I am leaving you is the knowledge that I knew, that I always knew, and that I will never forgive you for what you did to me when I was at my most vulnerable. My mother was sobbing now, ugly heaving cries that seemed to shake her whole body. My father, her husband, sat beside her looking shell-shocked, as if he was seeing his wife for the first time. Grandpa moved on without pausing. To my grandson Derek, my brother, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes, who had coasted through life on charm and good looks while I worked myself to exhaustion building a career. Derek had always been Grandpa's favorite too, or so I thought. He was the one who got the special treatment at Christmas, the extra attention at family gatherings, the benefit of the doubt whenever something went wrong. Or at least that was how it appeared on the surface. I was beginning to understand that Grandpa's attention had been something else entirely. Not favoritism, surveillance. Derek sat at the table with his wife Jennifer beside him, looking confident despite what had just been revealed about our uncle and our mother. He probably thought his sins were smaller, more forgivable. An affair or two, perhaps, but nothing compared to theft and fraud. He was wrong. To my grandson Derek, I leave the photographs. Derek's face went pale. What photographs? The ones I have been collecting for 2 years, Grandpa said calmly. The ones that document every business trip that was not really a business trip. Every late night at the office that was actually spent at hotel bars. Every woman you pursued while your wife sat at home with your children, wondering why her husband was always too busy for her. He pulled a stack of pictures from the envelope and spread them across the table. The images were damning. Derek at a resort in Miami with a woman half his age. Derek at a conference in Las Vegas, his arm around someone who was definitely not Jennifer. Derek at a bar in Chicago, leaning close to whisper in a stranger's ear. There were dozens of photographs. Different women, different cities, different years. A comprehensive record of infidelity that spanned most of Derek's marriage. I hired a private investigator, Grandpa said calmly. 2 years ago, when your wife Jennifer came to me crying because she suspected you were cheating, I told her I would look into it. I did. These are the results. Derek's wife Jennifer was sitting 2 seats away from him. She had picked up one of the photographs and was staring at it with an expression of absolute devastation. I watched her face cycle through disbelief, then recognition, then a kind of hollow understanding that was worse than anger. "You said you were in San Francisco for work," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You said you were presenting at a conference. You brought me back chocolates from Ghirardelli Square. Jennifer, please, let me explain. That is Karen. From your office. You told me she quit 2 years ago." Derek had no response to that. "Derek, you have been unfaithful to your wife consistently throughout your entire marriage," Grandpa said, each word landing like a blow. "You have lied to her, manipulated her, and made her doubt her own sanity when she questioned your behavior. When she came to me worried, you told her she was being paranoid, that she was crazy, that she needed therapy. You gaslit her, Derek. You made her believe she was losing her mind rather than admit what you were doing." Jennifer was crying now, not the dramatic sobs of my mother but quiet tears that seemed to come from somewhere deeper. "You do not deserve her," Grandpa continued. "You never did. And I hope she leaves you." "Grandpa, please," Derek started. "I am not leaving you any money either. What I am leaving you is the truth, delivered in front of your wife, so she can make an informed decision about whether to stay with a man who has treated her so poorly." Jennifer was crying now, gathering her purse and coat, standing up from the table. Derek reached for her arm, but she yanked it away. "Do not touch me," she said, her voice shaking. "Do not ever touch me again." She walked out of the dining room, and a moment later we heard the front door slam. Derek turned to glare at Grandpa, his face twisted with rage. "You had no right. That was my marriage, my business. You had no right to interfere. I had every right. Jennifer is family. She deserved to know what kind of man she married. This is insane. You are senile. This will never hold up in court." "Callum," Grandpa said, turning to me, "am I senile?" "No," I said quietly. "I had you evaluated by 3 independent physicians before we finalized the will. You passed every cognitive test with flying colors. You are of completely sound mind." Derek looked at me with pure hatred. "You knew about this. You helped him plan this whole thing. I did not know what was in the will, but I knew Grandpa was competent to make his own decisions. And I stand by that assessment." Derek stood up from the table, knocking his chair backward. "This is not over," he said. "I will contest this. I will have you declared incompetent. I will." "You will do nothing," Grandpa said calmly, "because if you try to contest this will, I have instructed Callum to release all of this evidence to the press. Your infidelity, your mother's fraud, your uncle's theft, everything will become public record. Is that what you want, Derek? To have your dirty laundry aired for the whole world to see?" Derek stood there, fists clenched, breathing hard. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the room. That left me, my father, my Aunt Margaret, and Grandpa. My mother was still crying at the table, my father rubbing her back in a daze. "Margaret," Grandpa said, turning to his daughter-in-law, "I have not forgotten you." Aunt Margaret, who had been sitting very still throughout this entire proceeding, looked up with fear in her eyes. "To my daughter-in-law Margaret, I leave my forgiveness." She blinked, clearly not expecting this. "I know you had nothing to do with any of this. You married into this family believing you were joining good people, and you have watched them disappoint you year after year. You stayed with Richard even when he gambled away your savings. You raised your children with kindness even when this family showed you none. You deserve better, Margaret, and I want you to know that I see you. I have always seen you." Aunt Margaret burst into tears, but they were different from my mother's tears. These were tears of relief, of being finally acknowledged after years of being invisible. I am leaving you enough money to start over if you choose to. $200,000 in an account with only your name on it. Richard cannot touch it. No one can touch it but you. Do with it what you will." Margaret sat there in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face. In 30 years of marriage to Uncle Richard, I had never seen anyone in our family acknowledge her suffering. She had been invisible, a background character in the drama of our family, expected to smile and nod while her husband gambled away their savings, and her in-laws treated her like hired help. "I want you to know something else," Grandpa continued, his voice gentle now in a way it had not been when speaking to his own children. "You stayed with Richard not because you are weak, but because you are loyal. Loyalty is a virtue, but it can be misused. Richard did not deserve your loyalty. He never did." "I did not know where else to go," Margaret whispered. "I had no money of my own, no career. I gave up everything when I married him." "I know, and that is why I want you to have options now. Use this money to build a life for yourself, Margaret. You have earned it, through every year of suffering you endured in silence." "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Dad." It was the first time I had ever heard her call him Dad. In all those years, she had always called him William or Mr. Ashworth, maintaining a formal distance that my grandmother had established decades ago. But now, in this moment of unexpected kindness, she finally claimed the relationship she had always wanted. Grandpa nodded, accepting her thanks with quiet dignity. Then he turned to face the rest of the table, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage of family bonds he had just destroyed. "I want everyone to understand something," he said. "I did not do this out of cruelty. I did not do it for revenge. I did it because the truth matters, because secrets poison families from the inside, because I am 91 years old and I refuse to die with lies on my conscience." He paused, coughing slightly, and I saw how much this was taking out of him. The performance of strength was costing him dearly. "I loved all of you," he continued. "I still love all of you, even Richard, even Patricia, even Derek. But love does not mean enabling bad behavior. Love does not mean pretending that theft and fraud and infidelity are acceptable as long as they happen within the family. Love means holding each other accountable. And tonight, finally, I am holding you accountable." The room was silent except for my mother's muffled sobs. "Now," Grandpa said, straightening his shoulders with visible effort, "there is one more person I need to address." Finally, Grandpa turned to me. "And to my grandson Callum, I leave everything else." I had expected something, maybe a few $1,000s, maybe some of Grandpa's books or his watch collection. I had not expected those words, spoken so simply with such finality. Everything else? The house, the investments, the savings accounts, the life insurance, all of it. $5.3 million, give or take, depending on how the markets perform between now and my death. I could not speak. I could not breathe. "I do not understand," I finally managed. "Why me?" Grandpa sat down heavily in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 91 years. "Because you are the only one who never asked me for anything, Callum. You are the only one who came to visit me because you wanted to see me, not because you wanted something from me. You are the only one who looked at me and saw a person, not a checkbook. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not do any of the things that might have been expected in that moment. I simply said, 'I do not deserve this.'" And Grandpa smiled, the first real smile I had seen from him all night. "That is exactly why you do. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there, 37 years of them. My name is Callum Ashworth. I am 37 years old, and I work as an estate lawyer at a mid-sized firm in Cleveland. I spend my days helping people plan for their deaths, drafting wills and trusts, navigating the complex web of inheritance law. It is not glamorous work, but it is important. The decisions people make about their estates affect generations. I became a lawyer partly because of Grandpa. He used to tell me stories about his own father, a factory worker who died without a will, leaving his family to fight over scraps while the courts took their cut. Grandpa had vowed that would never happen to his family. He would plan carefully, document everything, make sure his wishes were clear and legally enforceable. Grandpa had built his fortune from nothing. He grew up in the Depression, the son of that factory worker who died too young, leaving behind a widow and 5 children with nothing but debt and desperation. Grandpa was the oldest. He quit school at 14 to work, supporting his mother and siblings through the darkest years of American history. He never talked about those years except in fragments. The hunger, the shame of wearing clothes held together with patches, the jobs that paid pennies and demanded hours. But he talked about what he learned from them. The value of honest work, the importance of planning for the future, the knowledge that nothing was guaranteed and everything could be taken away. After the war, after he came back from Europe with a Purple Heart and memories he never shared, Grandpa started his own business. A small manufacturing company that made machine parts for the automotive industry. He worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week, for years. He married my grandmother, a woman as tough and practical as he was, and together they built something from nothing. By the time I was born, Grandpa was wealthy. Not ostentatiously wealthy, not the kind of wealth that announced itself with mansions and luxury cars, but comfortable, secure. The kind of wealthy that meant never worrying about where the next meal was coming from, never lying awake wondering how to pay the mortgage. He taught me the stories behind that wealth. He made sure I understood that money was not just numbers in a bank account. It was sacrifice and struggle and years of grinding work. It was something to be respected, managed carefully, not squandered on frivolity or taken for granted. The law is a tool, he used to say. You can use it to protect people or to hurt them. I want you to learn how to use it to protect. So I did. I went to law school, specialized in estate planning, built a career helping families avoid the chaos that comes when someone dies without proper preparation. I was good at my job, respected by my colleagues, trusted by my clients. But I never expected to be on the receiving end of an inheritance like this. Growing up, I was always the outsider in my own family. My brother Derek was the star, the athlete, the charmer who could talk his way out of any trouble. My mother doted on him, excused his failures, celebrated his modest achievements as if they were Olympic victories. I was the quiet one, the studious one, the kid who got straight A's and was told it was expected rather than praised. I learned early that my worth in this family was conditional. If I achieved, I was tolerated. If I failed, I was criticized. There was no unconditional love, no acceptance for who I was rather than what I could do. Grandpa was different. He saw me in a way no one else did. When I was 12, struggling with a math test that had left me in tears, Grandpa sat down with me at his kitchen table and worked through every problem, patient and calm, until I understood. He did not tell me I should have tried harder. He did not compare me to Derek. He just helped. When I was 17 and my first girlfriend broke up with me, Grandpa took me fishing and let me talk for hours about how unfair life was. He did not offer advice or tell me to man up. He just listened. When I graduated from law school at the top of my class, Grandpa was the only one who came to the ceremony. My parents had a conflict, they said. Derek was busy with work. But Grandpa drove 4 hours each way to watch me walk across that stage. I am proud of you, he said afterward, his hand firm on my shoulder. Not because you graduated, because you worked hard and stayed true to yourself. That is harder than any degree. I never forgot those words. They sustained me through the difficult years that followed, through the long nights at the law firm, through the family gatherings where I was ignored or criticized, through the slow realization that my parents would never love me the way I needed to be loved. Grandpa loved me that way, and I loved him back. That is why I helped him with his will. That is why I visited him every Sunday, even when my mother told me I was wasting my time, that he was just a senile old man who did not know what day it was. I knew better. I knew Grandpa was still sharp, still watching, still keeping track of everything that happened in his family. I just did not know he was planning to expose it all on Christmas Eve. The aftermath of that midnight reading was chaos. Uncle Richard left before dessert, his face a mask of barely contained rage. He called me the next morning, demanding that I help him challenge the will, threatening legal action, accusing me of manipulating Grandpa for my own benefit. I did not know what was in the will. I told him for the dozenth time. And even if I had, my job was to ensure Grandpa's wishes were properly documented, not to substitute my judgment for his. He left you everything. You cannot tell me you did not influence him somehow. Uncle Richard, I have not asked Grandpa for money since I was 8 years old and wanted a bicycle for my birthday. I built my own career, paid my own way through law school, supported myself entirely. If Grandpa chose to leave me his estate, it was because of how I treated him, not because of what I expected from him. The phone went silent for a long moment. Then Uncle Richard said something I will never forget. You always thought you were better than us. This just proves it. He hung up before I could respond. My mother called next, her voice thick with tears and recrimination. She did not threaten legal action. Instead, she tried guilt. How could you let him do this to me? I am his daughter. I took care of him for years. I deserve something. You took advantage of him when he was recovering from surgery, Mom. You forged documents to take control of his finances. You moved hundreds of thousands of dollars into accounts he could not access. That is not taking care of someone. That is stealing from them. I was protecting him. He was not capable of managing his own affairs. Someone had to step in. He was capable. 3 independent doctors confirmed it. You just wanted control. That is not fair. None of this is fair, Mom. But Grandpa made his choices based on how people treated him. If you do not like the result, maybe you should think about why. She hung up too. Derek's wife, Jennifer, filed for divorce 3 days after Christmas. I heard about it from my father, who was somehow still trying to hold the family together despite everything that had been revealed. She is taking the house, Dad said, his voice tired, and custody of the kids. Derek is going to fight it, but her lawyer says the photographs are admissible as evidence of marital misconduct. Good for her, I said. She deserves better than him. He is your brother, Callum. He is a liar and a cheat. Being related to someone does not obligate me to approve of their behavior. Dad sighed, the same defeated sigh I had been hearing from him my entire life. He was not a bad man, my father. He was just weak, unable or unwilling to stand up to the stronger personalities in our family. He had let my mother run things for so long that he had forgotten he had his own opinions. What are you going to do with the money? He asked. I do not know yet. Pay off my student loans, probably. Set up a trust for my future kids, if I ever have any. Give some to charity. I paused. I might help Aunt Margaret, if she decides to leave Uncle Richard. She deserves a fresh start. That is generous of you. It is what Grandpa would have wanted. And it was. Grandpa had always liked Margaret, had seen her as the best thing to ever happen to his troubled oldest son. If the money could help her escape that marriage and build a better life, it would be put to good use. The weeks after Christmas were a strange limbo. Grandpa was still alive, still living in the house he had occupied for 60 years, still sharp as ever despite his physical frailty. I visited him every Sunday just like before, but now our conversations had a different weight to them. The family was in chaos. Richard had hired a lawyer to contest the will, though Patricia Velasquez, the attorney I had helped Grandpa retain, assured me his case was hopeless. The evidence of his theft was overwhelming, and trying to fight it publicly would only bring more attention to his crimes. My mother had stopped speaking to me entirely. She sent messages through my father, passive-aggressive notes about how I had betrayed her trust, how I had helped Grandpa humiliate her, how she would never forgive me for what I had done. I did not respond. I did not have the energy for her guilt trips anymore. Derek's divorce proceedings were ugly and public. Jennifer's lawyer had subpoenaed the photographs Grandpa had collected, and they became part of the court record. Derek's affairs were now a matter of public knowledge, discussed in hushed tones at the country club, whispered about at school pickup. His children, my niece and nephew, were caught in the middle of it all. I tried to reach out to them, but Derek had poisoned that well. He told them I was responsible for destroying their family, that I had helped Grandpa collect the evidence, that I was the real villain in this story. They believed him, at least for now. Maybe someday they would learn the truth. Maybe someday they would understand that their father's actions had destroyed the family, not my grandfather's decision to expose them. Margaret was the only bright spot in those dark weeks. She filed for divorce in January, using the money Grandpa had left her to hire a good lawyer and secure temporary housing. Uncle Richard was furious, but there was nothing he could do. Grandpa had structured the bequest specifically to be inaccessible to creditors or spouses, a legal shield I had helped him design. "I should have done this years ago," Margaret told me over coffee one afternoon. "I knew he was gambling. I knew he was lying about money, but I was afraid. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of starting over. Afraid of what people would think. And now I am still afraid. But I am also free, and freedom is worth being afraid for." She moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, started looking for work, began the slow process of rebuilding the life she had given up when she married Uncle Richard. I helped where I could, offering legal advice and occasional financial support, though she was careful not to become dependent on me. "Your grandfather gave me the money to build my own life," she said, "not to become a burden on someone else." "You are not a burden, Margaret." "I know, but I need to prove that to myself. I need to know I can stand on my own." I understood that need. I had spent my own life proving myself, earning my place, refusing to accept handouts even when they were offered. Grandpa had seen that in me, had respected it, had ultimately rewarded it. Margaret was cut from the same cloth. "Do you regret it?" I asked him one afternoon as we sat in his study, the fire crackling in the hearth. "Exposing everyone like that?" Grandpa considered the question carefully, the way he always did. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my children and grandchildren turned out to be people who would steal from me and lie to me and take advantage of my weakness. But do I regret telling the truth? No. The truth needed to be told. It destroyed the family. The family was already destroyed, Callum. It was just hidden beneath a veneer of politeness and holiday gatherings. I simply pulled back the curtain. But why Christmas Eve? Why like that? In front of everyone? Grandpa smiled, a sad smile that contained decades of disappointment. Because I wanted them to know that I knew. I wanted them to see each other's faces when the truth came out. And I wanted you to understand why I chose you. I still do not understand that part. Then let me explain. He leaned forward in his chair, his old eyes meeting mine. You came to see me every Sunday for 15 years. Rain or shine, sick or healthy, busy or free. You never asked for money, never asked for favors, never treated me like an obligation. You asked about my life, my memories, my thoughts. You treated me like a person. Of course I did. You are my grandfather. And Richard is my son. Patricia is my daughter. Derek is my grandson. Blood did not stop them from seeing me as nothing more than a source of money. Blood did not make them kind or honest or trustworthy. He reached out and gripped my hand with surprising strength. But you, Callum, you showed me what family should be. You showed me that love does not have to be conditional, that respect does not have to be earned through wealth. You gave me the only thing I really wanted in my final years, genuine companionship. I felt tears prick my eyes but blinked them back. I just visited Grandpa. Anyone could have done that. But no one else did. That is the point. They all could have treated me the way you did. They all chose not to. And choices have consequences. He squeezed my hand once more, then released it. I am tired, Callum. I think I will rest now. I helped him to his bedroom, made sure he was comfortable, and let myself out of the house. As I drove home through the winter darkness, I thought about what he had said. Choices have consequences. Such a simple truth, and yet so many people seemed determined to ignore it. Grandpa passed away on February 14th, Valentine's Day. He went peacefully in his sleep, which was more than many people get. I was the one who found him, having come by for our usual Sunday visit, and I was the one who called the funeral home and made the arrangements. The morning was cold and gray, typical February weather in Cleveland. I let myself into the house with my key, called out my usual greeting, and received no answer. The silence felt different that day, heavier somehow, and I knew before I even climbed the stairs what I would find. He was lying in his bed, his face peaceful, his hands folded on his chest. He looked smaller in death than he had in life, as if whatever force had animated him had taken some of his physical presence with it when it left. I stood in the doorway for a long time, just looking at him, saying goodbye in the only way I could. Then I did what needed to be done. I called the funeral home. I called his doctor to certify the death. I called Patricia Velasquez to begin the process of executing the estate. I was efficient, practical, professional, all the things Grandpa had taught me to be. I did not cry until that night, alone in my apartment, when the reality of his absence finally hit me. Then I wept like I had not wept since I was a child. Great heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than grief. I was not just mourning Grandpa. I was mourning the only person in my family who had truly seen me, who had loved me without conditions, who had believed in me when no one else did. The funeral was small. Richard and Patricia both declined to attend, claiming they were too upset, though I suspect they were simply too ashamed to face the community that had heard rumors about what happened on Christmas Eve. The Cleveland social scene was small enough that everyone knew everyone, and the story of Grandpa's midnight while reading had spread quickly. Derek came, but he sat in the back and left immediately after the service without speaking to anyone. He looked terrible, gaunt and pale, the weight of his destroyed marriage visible in every line of his face. I felt a flicker of sympathy for him, despite everything. He had brought this on himself, but he was still my brother. The church was less than a quarter full. Most of the attendees were Grandpa's old business associates, men and women who remembered him from the early days of his company, who had worked beside him or competed against him or simply admired what he had built. They came up to me after the service, shaking my hand, sharing memories, telling me what a fine man my grandfather had been. "He was one of the good ones," said Harold Brennan, who had been Grandpa's business partner for 30 years. "Honest as the day is long. Never cheated anyone, never cut corners, never forgot where he came from." "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot. He talked about you all the time, you know. How proud he was of you. How you were the only one who turned out right." Harold shook his head sadly. "I am sorry about your family, Callum. I know this has been hard." "It has. But Grandpa made his choices, and I have to respect them. That is all any of us can do. Respect the choices of the people we love, even when they are hard." Margaret came. She looked different than I had ever seen her, lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had filed for divorce the week before, using the money Grandpa had left her to hire a good lawyer. "Thank you for being there for him," she said, hugging me at the graveside. "He loved you so much. I loved him too. He knew. That is all that matters." The cemetery was quiet in the February cold, the ground frozen hard, the trees bare and skeletal against the gray sky. We stood around the grave while the priest said the final words, and then it was over. 91 years of life, reduced to a plot of earth and a marble headstone. But that was not all he left behind. He left me his fortune, yes, but also his values, his principles, the example of how to live with integrity in a world that often rewards the opposite. Those things would outlast the money. Those things would outlast everything. The estate took several months to settle, as estates always do. There were taxes to pay, investments to liquidate, properties to transfer. By the end of it, my share came to just over $5 million, exactly as Grandpa had predicted. I kept my job. I did not need the money, not really, but I needed the purpose. I needed something to get up for every morning, some way to contribute to the world that did not involve simply spending inherited wealth. But I also started doing things differently. I took on more pro bono cases, helping families who could not afford estate planning but desperately needed it. I funded scholarships for first-generation law students, the kind of students who had to work their way through school the way I had. I donated to charities Grandpa had supported, keeping his memory alive through good works. And I visited his grave every Sunday, just as I had visited him every Sunday when he was alive. I would sit on the bench near his headstone and talk to him, telling him about my week, asking for advice on difficult cases, thanking him for everything he had given me. People probably thought I was crazy, talking to a dead man, but I did not care. The relationship I had with Grandpa was the most important one of my life, and I was not going to let it end just because he was no longer physically present. I hope I am making you proud, I would say at the end of each visit. I hope I am living up to what you saw in me. And somehow, in the silence of the cemetery, I always felt like he was answering. The family never recovered from that Christmas Eve. Richard and Patricia have not spoken to me since the funeral. Derek sends occasional hostile emails, usually threatening to challenge the will again, but nothing ever comes of it. I have become the black sheep, the traitor, the nephew and son who betrayed his own blood. But I did not betray anyone. I simply stood by while the truth was told. If my family cannot forgive me for that, then perhaps they are not a family worth belonging to. I have built my own family now. I married 2 years after Grandpa died. A woman named Elena who I met at a charity gala I sponsored. The gala was for a children's literacy program, one of the causes Grandpa had supported throughout his life. He believed that education was the great equalizer, the thing that could lift people out of poverty and give them opportunities they would never have otherwise. I had continued his support after his death, not just with money but with time. Elena was a volunteer coordinator for the program, a woman with dark hair and bright eyes and a laugh that seemed to fill whatever room she was in. She was not impressed by my money or my suit or the fact that I had written a large check to the organization. She was impressed that I had actually read the program materials, that I asked questions about outcomes and impact, that I seemed to genuinely care about the children the program was serving. Most donors just want to write a check and feel good about themselves, she told me later, over drinks at a bar near the venue. They do not actually want to know if their money is making a difference. I learned from my grandfather that money is a tool, I said. It is only as good as how you use it. If I am going to support something, I want to know it is actually working. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. He was. He died about a year ago. I miss him every day. Elena reached across the table and took my hand. I am sorry for your loss. It was such a simple gesture, but it meant more to me than I could explain. Here was someone who did not know my family drama, did not know about the Christmas Eve revelation or the contested will or the estrangement from my parents and brother. She just saw a man who missed his grandfather, and she offered comfort. We started dating shortly after that night. Elena was everything my family was not. Honest, kind, genuinely interested in other people. She came from a working-class background, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a mechanic, and she had worked her way through college and graduate school on scholarships and part-time jobs. I do not need your money, she told me early in our relationship, when I tried to pay for everything. I have my own job, my own apartment, my own life. I want a partner, not a provider. I was not trying to. I know. But I need you to understand something. I am not with you because of what you have. I am with you because of who you are. Those words echoed something Grandpa had said to me once, about how I was the only one who treated him like a person instead of a checkbook. Elena saw me the same way. She saw past the inheritance, past the family drama, past all the baggage I carried, and she loved the person underneath. We got married in a small ceremony, just a few dozen people at a venue in the countryside. My parents were not invited. Derek was not invited. Margaret came and some of Grandpa's old business associates and Elena's family and friends. It was nothing like the elaborate weddings my family had always thrown, and it was perfect. She is kind and smart and she loves me for who I am, not for what I can give her. We have a son, born last spring, and I named him William after my grandfather. When little William is old enough, I will tell him about his great-grandfather. I will tell him about the man who built a fortune through hard work and honesty, who expected the same from his family, who was betrayed by those closest to him. And I will tell him about Christmas Eve, about the midnight reading, about the moment when truth finally triumphed over decades of lies. I will tell him that integrity matters, that honesty matters, that how you treat people, especially people who have less power than you, defines who you really are. Those are the lessons Grandpa taught me. Those are the lessons I want to pass on. Every Christmas Eve now, Elena and I continue a tradition I started after Grandpa's death. We gather at the cemetery, just the two of us and now little William, and we light a candle at his grave. We stand in the cold and the dark, watching the flame flicker against the headstone, and we remember. I tell stories about Grandpa, the same stories he used to tell me about hard work and honesty and the importance of planning for the future. Elena shares what she has learned about him through me, through the values I try to live by, through the way I treat the people around me. And William, too young to understand but old enough to sense the importance of the moment, watches with wide eyes. Who was he? William will ask someday. Who was great-grandpa William? And I will tell him. I will tell him about a boy who quit school at 14 to support his family. About a soldier who came home from war with scars no one could see. About a businessman who built a fortune through honest work and never forgot where he came from. I will tell him about the Christmas Eve when great-grandpa stood up at midnight and told the truth, no matter the cost. About the courage it took to expose the people he loved, to hold them accountable for their betrayals, to choose integrity over comfort. And I will tell him about the quiet moments too. The Sunday visits, the fishing trips, the conversations in the study by the fire. The small ways Grandpa showed his love, not through grand gestures or expensive gifts, but through presence and attention and the simple act of listening. He sounds amazing, William will say. He was, and you carry his name. That is a responsibility, William. You have to live in a way that honors it. Maybe that sounds like a lot of pressure to put on a child, but I do not see it that way. I see it as a gift, the same gift Grandpa gave me. The knowledge that we come from somewhere, that our choices matter, that the legacy we leave behind is measured not in money but in character. $5.3 million is a lot of money. It has given me security, freedom, the ability to do good in the world. But the real inheritance, the one that truly matters, is not monetary. It is the knowledge that someone saw me, truly saw me, and believed I was worthy of love and trust. That is worth more than any fortune. Grandpa knew that. He knew it all along. And on that Christmas Eve at midnight, surrounded by people who had disappointed him year after year, he gave me the greatest gift he could. The truth about who my family really was, and the freedom to choose who I wanted to become. I have thought a lot about forgiveness in the years since that night. About whether I should try to repair my relationships with my mother and brother, whether the bonds of blood are stronger than the betrayals that severed them. I do not have a clear answer. Some days I think I should try, that life is too short for permanent estrangement, that Grandpa would want me to be the bigger person. Other days I remember what they did to him, how they stole from him and lied to him and tried to control him when he was at his most vulnerable. What I have settled on is this. I am open to reconciliation, but I am not going to pursue it. If my mother wants to apologize, truly apologize, I will listen. If Derek wants to rebuild our relationship, I will consider it. But I am not going to chase people who have shown me who they really are. Grandpa taught me that too. He gave his family chances over and over, and they disappointed him every time. He loved them despite their flaws, but he never pretended those flaws did not exist. And when they pushed him too far, he pushed back. That is not bitterness. That is self-respect. I choose to become someone like him, someone who values integrity over convenience, truth over comfort, genuine connection over superficial obligation. That is my inheritance. That is my legacy. That is what I will pass on to my son and his children after him. Thank you, Grandpa, for everything. For the money, yes, but more importantly, for believing in me when no one else did. For seeing the person I could become even when I could not see it myself. For teaching me that family is not just about blood, but about how you treat the people you love. I will see you every Sunday. I will make you proud. That is a promise. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Before you go, I have left 2 more stories here on your screen. Both from men who discovered that family is not always who you are born to. It is who stands by you when the truth comes out. Click on whichever one calls to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be the outsider looking in, that notification bell is your invitation. Until tomorrow, remember, your story matters, even if they tried to erase it.